In this lesson, we're going to be working on adding some sparks to this background. If you want to follow along, the project I'm working on is 4D VFX muzzle flash is done. You can right click in your project manager to import that project. This is the one we're after right here. Click on that and hit open. And that should look something like this. If your media isn't connected, make sure to select all of your bins up here in the media pool. Right click and say relink clips for selected bins. Go to your work files and select your media folder and hit select folder. That should relink everything. You should be good to go. All right, so what we're looking at here is to add sparks because he's shooting towards her. And let's say he misses a couple times and it kind of bounces off the wall and makes sparks. One thing I'm going to do is just cut this clip right here because we're only going to have the sparks at the very beginning and there's no sense in bringing this whole clip into Fusion. So let's just razor it right there in the middle. And with the playhead over the clip, we'll click on Fusion. Again, we'll load our LUT up here in the upper right-hand corner, go down to Blackmagic Design, 6K film to video. We do have some interactive lighting here, some real lighting. And so we're going to want the sparks to show up right then for sure. And we might just fudge it and add some more sparks later just because it looks cool. We definitely want to right here on frame 380. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing that we're going to need is some sparks. Let's go up to our media pool and under VFX, I'll right click and say import media. Under our media folder, under visual effects, we have a folder called sparks. And let's just select all of those and hit open. And we'll right click and say create bin with selected clips. And this is going to be called, surprisingly, sparks. So we have a few different little clips here of just sparks falling. We can zoom in here a little bit in our media pool and just kind of scrub through this to get a decent idea of what each one is. So I think, yeah, maybe just 101. Let's try that. And we'll bring this in. I'll hit F2 to rename our media in. We'll call this original footage. MI. This is going to be Sparks 101 MI. And we'll start just by merging this over our footage. Take the output and put it over our original footage output, and that'll make a merge. And we'll call this Sparks 101 MRG. Now let's go to the keyframes panel, zoom in here a little bit, and we'll move this down the road a touch. And we're going to line this up so that the sparks start right there at our playhead. So we can kind of preview it by moving it back and forth. I'd say something like that is fine. And we'll just close our keyframes, select our merge, and for apply mode, let's say screen. So now we have the sparks showing up over our video. And we're done. We're not done. It looks pretty bad. There's a few different things that need to change here. Number one is the spark should probably be going the other way. If a bullet is traveling this way, it's probably going to shoot sparks along with it, so from left to right. The other thing is we want the spark to be happening back here on the wall. We probably need to adjust the sizing a little bit so that it's not just bouncing off her hair awkwardly. And guess what? We have a moving camera here, and unlike our muzzle flash, this effect happens over quite a few frames. And so we have to match the motion of this clip so that we can kind of stick this thing to the wall so it looks like it's actually integrated into the environment. So we'll take that part slow, and the parts we've learned we'll go a little faster with. It would be tempting to grab this merge and move these sparks around, flip them, kind of put this where it needs to be, size it and all that stuff, right? And there wouldn't be much wrong with doing that if we didn't have to track it. It does look pretty cool. But for now, we're going to hold off on this because we're going to kind of need to size and position this after we track it. So I'll just hit undo a couple times. And let's go down to our nodes and talk about tracking a little bit. I'm going to select our original footage because that's what we want to track. And I'll hit Shift Spacebar. That'll bring up our Select Tool panel. And we're going to type TRACK. That's going to bring up all the different ways that we can track things. Now, if you're not familiar with tracking in Resolve, there's 3 different trackers. The first one is called Tracker. Amazing. And this is for generally tracking things that you might use 1 or 2 points to track. Something like if you're going to have a piece of text bounce along with somebody's head while they walk or something. Or if you have a drone shot and it's facing right down at the ground and you want to track something that's going by on the ground. It's kind of like more simple things. Camera tracker is really complicated stuff. That will actually do a 3D track and solve on your scene so that you can integrate all kinds of 3D elements and everything. And although that's really cool, it's oftentimes a lot more complicated than you need. We could probably do this with the camera tracker, but we just don't really need to. Also, I believe the camera tracker is only available in the paid version of Resolve, and we're trying to make sure that anybody can follow along here. So we're going to use the planar tracker. The planar tracker is a way to track a bunch of points all at once and figure out some motion from kind of averaging out the points. So we'll hit add, and that'll add the planar tracker down here in our nodes. And with that selected, let's go up to the inspector. So what we're really trying to do here is have Fusion look at the motion of whatever we're trying to stick things to, right? If we wanted something to look like it's on her coat, we would track her coat. If we want something to look like it's on this shelf, we would track the shelf. And what we want is this part right here, because this is where our sparks are going to show up. You always want to track like right where you want things to show up for the most part. And before we track, we're going to scrub through this a little bit and see if there's any part of this shot that just isn't ever behind her. And that's just not true. So take that, most tracking tutorials. So what we're going to do is track the beginning part of this shot, and we're basically just going to have everything faded out by this point, by the time she goes across it. So we really need to have a pretty good track until like here, until like frame 418 or so. And we really only need to start our track when this element shows up. But let's back up a couple frames. And with my planar tracker node selected, we can go up here to our shot and we can start to just draw a shape. So I'm going to draw a shape, something like this. And what I'm trying to do is get quite a few different little points here that have some contrast. So this kind of darker spot, these little spots here, these stripes, these little spots here. Contrast is really what you're looking for, because what it's going to do is put a bunch of points here where there are contrasting spots, and it's going to track the motion of each of those little spots as it goes through the video. And before we do that, we're going to go over here and look in the inspector. There's a few different things to go over. The first thing is that our operation mode right now is track, which would make sense when you open up a tracker. You're basically saying, okay, I'm going to pick some points and I want you to track the motion. Great. Tracker here, let's leave at point. Motion type is perspective. And that's kind of the more complicated way to track things. We can actually probably bring this to translation, rotation, and scale. And that will just be a little bit easier for the computer to think about this motion, because that's really all we're going to need is, does it move left and right, up and down? Does it rotate? Does it get bigger or smaller? If this were something where we were moving the camera from side to side quite a bit, we might want to track the perspective because it might kind of change the skew of it. Output background, track channel Luma, that looks great. And now I'm going to start at frame 376, and we'll do one more thing before we track. Here where it says reference time, I'm just going to click on set. What that's going to do is say, all right, this frame, this is the one that I'm going to look for in all the other frames. I'm going to figure out where all these points are. So that looks great. And let's hit this button, track to end. And it has a seizure and goes crazy. And let's see how that looks. You can kind of page through this. And it's kind of hard to tell how it went. But one thing we are looking for is, does a bunch of stuff go in front of most of this? Or does it feel like it pretty much stays where it is? I think it's pretty good for the most part. All right, and about here, that track is going to get wonky, right about there, about 417. So about 417 or so, we're going to click this little button right here. And this gets rid of the tracking data after our current frame. And so now we have tracking data just where it's good. And that's where we're going to put our sparks. So let's see if that worked. You can do this a bunch of different ways. One easy way to check this is here where it says operation mode, switch this to steady. And if we can play this back and this part pretty much sticks where it's at, then we did a pretty good job. And it looks like it looks pretty good. So it's kind of freaky, like everything around it moves, but this part stays where it should. You can kind of page through this. And if it doesn't move around, then we are pretty good. Looks good. Looks like a good track. I'll switch this back to track. And now let's make it so that we can use this information to stick things to the wall. All we have to do is with our tracker selected here in the inspector, click on create planar transform. That will make a little node down here called planar transform. And what this is a node that has one job, and its job is to move things the exact same way that this back wall moves. So for instance, if we were to take our sparks, I'll grab this and hold shift and drag it onto our connection here. We'll see our sparks, although they're not over by the wall, they move along with the shot now. So that's a good time. So this is going to be even better if we can move these over to where we're actually tracking. Normally, what we have been doing, just because we've been doing really simple stuff, is moving this around in the merge. And if we were to do that, to grab this merge and move stuff over, it would kind of look like it works, but the track isn't going to be quite right. It sort of looks like it works now, but you can see if you zoom in that it's not moving quite the same as the footage, although this did work surprisingly well. And that's because of the order of these nodes. What we're doing is putting our sparks down there, matching the motion, and then we're taking this entire thing and we're kind of moving it over. You can probably see it a little better when we move it over here. See how the smoke kind of like floats around weird? It doesn't quite match the motion. It's because we're not rotating things like on the right axis, really. Our axis of rotation and movement and stuff is way over here when it should be like right here. So when you use a planar transform and you're trying to match movement, you generally don't want to move stuff around after this transform. So I'm going to undo that, and we're just going to leave this merge where it is. So how in the world do we move this over to where it's supposed to be? Let's select our sparks, and we're going to use a node called transform. You can click on this button right here in the middle of the interface to add a transform node like that. Or with this node selected, you can hit Shift Spacebar and type XF. That's short for transform, and hit enter. That'll do the same thing. So now we're importing our sparks, and now we can move them. And now we can move this over, and because this transform happens before we apply the tracking, this will stick right to the wall. Now when we go back and forth, this sticks to the wall perfectly. And that's what we're looking for. So in this transform node, we can also flip and size everything how we want. And remember, our tracking data only goes to like here. So we want to make sure that we fade this out. That we can do in the merge. So I'll select the merge. And by this point, we want our blend to be at 0. So let's go over to our keyframes. Let's keyframe our blend for our merge. We're just going to fade this out over time. And we're going to bring this back here a few frames, like 392. And we'll blend this back up to 1. So now we have this kind of fading out over time, which works just fine. In fact, we might not want this blend so big anyway. Let's actually remove this keyframe, this middle keyframe. You can just go to that frame and click on the diamond again. And let's go back to about here where we can see the spark still. That's at like 385. And we'll turn this down to be tasteful. We want this to be bright enough, but not transparent. So this is like transparent. We just want this to be white, but not like crazy like this. Just white. Something like that maybe. So for me, that's blend around 0.4. And let's see how this looks. I think that works pretty well. A little bit of sparks. I think we might make this a little bit smaller. Although the sparks look cool, I feel like the scale is just a little weird. So let's take this transform and we'll just size this down a little bit. Definitely a fan of big sparks, but these just don't look like sparks that would be that big. These look like little sparks. So if you use little sparks and make them too big, it's not going to look realistic, unfortunately, as much as we want it to. So it's just a little bit to add just a little bit of danger there. So that's one element. It's actually probably the hardest part. Now let's add a little bit of lighting here, because if there's this kind of big bright spark, there'd be a little bit more lighting here on this wall. And although we have the lighting from the gunshot, we still need to have a little bit of light here. Down in our nodes, let's get a little bit more organized. We can actually get rid of planar tracker. I'll probably just delete that because all of our tracking information lives in planar transform. Let's rename this. We'll call this wall track PXF. PXF is for planar transform because XF is transform. We'll just leave this at transform 1. It's pretty obvious that we're transforming the sparks by looking at this. All right, let's add some lighting. Again, we're just going to add a background node and merge that over everything, just like we did with the muzzle flashes. Background node. Let's unhook this for a second, and I'll grab the color from one of these sparks and maybe make it a little brighter. And we'll put this over everything with our merge. Under apply mode, let's say soft light, and let's brighten this up a little bit. A little too yellow, make a little more red. Yeah, maybe something like that. Rename stuff. It's going to be called lighting BG, lighting MRG. And let's make a mask for this. Again, we could just click on polygon mask, but this time let's actually use an ellipse. So I'll click on ellipse. It works the exact same way. And I'll call this wall lighting underscore EL for ellipse. And now we'll move this ellipse mask around. I have this selected down in the nodes, and we'll put the center right there on the sparks. And then I'll zoom out a little bit and grab the edge of this, and we can kind of size it down like that. If you grab the side, it'll stretch it horizontally. The bottom or top, it'll stretch it vertically. But if you grab like this lower corner, you can do both at the same time. So let's do something like this maybe, and let's soften this edge a little bit. Pretty soft. Just want to add a little bit of light there. That just adds a little bit of light over everything. And for this lighting, we want this to stick to the wall too, but really it's only lit up for like a few frames. And these sparks aren't going to be putting out that much light. So we're really going to want this to just mostly be like in a couple frames. So what we can do is just animate this mask. Let's select wall lighting, and here where it says center, let's add a keyframe right there. Then let's take this a couple frames this way. And we'll make sure that this center is on our sparks each frame. So there we go, 1, 2, 3. By that time, we're just going to fade this out. And we could do that with the merge, or we can just do that with the level. Let's just do it with the level since we're here. So that's full. And then by this time, it's like pretty much all done. Again, we can take this here, maybe bring the level down to 50, and then here it's going to be at 0. And we can just kind of animate everything all in this one node. Let's see how it looks. Here we go. Have just a little bit of a flash of light there. Makes it seem like it's actually showing up. Yeah, I like it. So we can use this same technique to add sparks as many as we want. For this training, we're just going to add that one. Definitely makes it seem like she doesn't want to go over there, right? And that's the point. Let's go back to our edit, wait for this to cache, see how it looks. Let's back up a little. Boom. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool because in that context, we have that cause and effect, right? We have him shoot, boom. And although it's not really realistic, it does work to have the sparks come in right here. Boom, like that. Looks nice. So that's another VFX shot all done. Good work, everybody.